Hello, everybody. This is Linda Abraham. I'm the president and founder of Accepted. I've been a medical school admissions consultant for over 20 years, and I'm very excited to present to you today the 5-part framework for a successful medical school application. A few items worth noting before we start. We're going to have a contest at the end or towards the end of the webinar based solely on the content presented during this webinar. So stay tuned and you can have a chance to win. If you have not yet downloaded your webinar worksheet, you can find it in the handout section of your control panel. I would encourage you to download it and print it out so you can use it to take notes. You can use it for whatever you want, but I do think it will help you follow the webinar and, again, maximize the next hour. And then thirdly, I'm going to ask you questions. Some of them will be in the form of polls, and then you'll click an option on your screen, but some of them will involve hand raising. And that means that you're going to click on the hand icon on your control panel. So now I'm going to ask a question. Please raise your hand if you are attending this webinar because you want to become a physician and that's your dream career. Please raise your hand if you are here because you want to become a physician, either an MD or DO. Please raise your hand if you want to become a physician. Okay, the hands are going up. Good. You guys found, and you're here for the right reasons, because this webinar is not just about getting accepted. Being accepted to medical school is simply a means to an end, and that end is, of course, becoming a physician. Now, I'd like to learn a little bit about you before we actually start the webinar. The first question, and I'd like you to answer in the question window, is where are you located? City and state, if you're in the United States. A few of you may be from outside the United States, and then city and country, please. San Francisco, San Diego, fellow Californians, Charlotte, North Carolina, Boston, Rocky Mount, North Carolina, Bridgewater, New Jersey, Nashville, Chicago, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, a neighbor, Philadelphia, Hershey, Pennsylvania, Dallas, San Antonio, Jackson, Long Island, Elon, North Carolina, Massachusetts, San Francisco, Florida, Tampa. Well, we got from all over the country. Okay. Anybody from the Northwest? Northwest does not seem to be well represented this evening here. But we got New England, we have the South, Midwest, East. Okay, apparently nobody from the Northwest. All right, that's okay. Maybe they'll come later. Now that I know a little bit about where you're located geographically, where are you located in terms of the application process? All right, and that should be showing up on your screen momentarily. Are you preparing for a 2018-19 application or for 2019 or later? Okay. Let's see, we're at 71% having voted. Can we get it over 80%? We have one option in the lead. 78% having voted. Anybody else want to vote? Which best identifies you, preparing for the 2018-19 application or preparing for a 2019 or later? All right, we're now at 80%, 83%. All right, here are the results. 62% of you are planning to apply 2018-19 and 41% are planning for 2019 or later. That's great. Okay, I'm a little surprised at the number of you planning ahead, but I think it's wonderful that you are. Whenever you're applying. And now the next question is, I'm going to hide the results. The next question is, are you a first-time applicant or a reapplicant? All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. 75% of you are first-time applicants and 25% of you are reapplicants. Okay, good to know. Welcome again to all of you. Before we dive into the framework, I'm told that some people attending webinars are really are very nervous if I just announce that I'm going to have an offer at the end of the webinar. And I really would rather you not be nervous and paying attention to the content I'm going to present. So I'm just going to tell you what the offer is right now. We are going, as a gift to you, we're giving you $250 off any primary application package. To get that, take advantage of that gift, take advantage of that offer, use coupon code MEDSAVE250, and this will expire on February 20th. This is only, you will not find this on the website. This is only for registrants at this webinar this evening. Okay, so let's move on. I got a call early this month, very similar to the many calls that I get at this time of year, from a fellow named Joe. Now, he wanted to go to medical school. He wanted to go to an allopathic U.S. medical school, preferably in his home state. I asked him about his GPA, his MCAT score, his major, clinical exposure, community service, and he was very concerned that I was going to be kind. I try and be kind, but I also don't feel it's kind to mislead people, so I was definitely going to be honest and give him my best opinion, and that's what he wanted. And he had a 3.2 GPA, 2.9 in the sciences, from a decent state school, a 495 MCAT, and his clinical exposure was a summer of volunteering in a local ER, plus shadowing the family physician for a week. He was a bio major, and his community service outside of the volunteering in the ER consisted of a couple of volunteer gigs at Habitat for Humanity. I explained to him what I thought he needed to do to become competitive. And as you'll see through this webinar, he has a lot to do. But even though his qualifications now are probably not what he needs to get into a U.S. medical school, there's a lot he can do to change them and transform himself into a competitive applicant so that he can pursue his dreams. Now, for those of you thinking ahead to a 2019-20 application, you might identify with Joe's situation more than those of you applying to a 2018-19 application, i.e. this upcoming application cycle. But I think you'll both find a lot of relevance to the framework that I've developed, and that framework has come out of conversations with the hundreds of Joes and their parents that I've talked to over the years. The real question that Joe was asking is, how can I get into medical school? And that's exactly what we're going to discuss the rest of the hour. I'm also going to issue a couple of caveats and warnings along the way about ways that will hamper your chances or reduce your chances of getting in. And here's the first one. Don't think that waving a magic wand is going to get you into medical school. A dab of makeup won't do it. Spin doesn't work unless you're playing ping pong, which I do play, but it doesn't work in medical school admissions. Substance is what's going to get you into medical school. And substance, in my mind, means competitive qualifications and an effective presentation of those qualifications through your application. Your overriding aim is to show that you belong at medical school, at the medical schools you are applying to. If you do that successfully, they will want you and they will accept you. My goal for this webinar is to show you that a successful medical application has to have not 1 or 2 or 3 elements, but 5. And successful applications have all 5 of these elements. So let's go through them. Number 1, an absolutely foundational for a successful medical school application is showing that you can do the work, that you can handle the fire hose of academics and science that is medical school. So before I tell you how I think you need to do that, how do you intend to show you can handle the academic demands of medical school? In the question window, please. MCAT, GPA in volunteering, upward trend, take challenging courses, good. Multitasking, I know, multitasking usually destroys my performance, but I'm not sure that's what you mean. Perform well in upper division pre-med courses, good. Take a heavier course load, that can be a double-edged sword. Overcoming adversity while maintaining good grades, good. Rigorous coursework and high MCAT and good grades, good. Okay, heavier sciences. Okay, this one you're doing really well on. You are a fantastic audience, I can tell already. The most common way to show that you can do the work is simply through your undergraduate transcript and your MCAT score. That's the basics. There's nothing revolutionary there. And this is information that's presented in your primary application. Ideally, you want to be at or above the averages for accepted students at the programs you're applying to in both grades and test scores. However, what can you do if, let's say, your grades are a little bit below average? If you didn't get that A+, how can you convince schools to accept you? All right, let's first of all realize that averages are what they are because people with below average grades and test scores are accepted. However, the farther away you are below average, and if both your grades and your MCAT are below average, the less likely it is that you can convince the medical school you can handle the demands of their program. Let's say, what if you have a below average, a significantly below average grade point average or a low test score? Then I would suggest that you seriously consider a post-bac program. Now, we'll be sending out these URLs later, so you don't have to be madly jotting them down now. But we have several resources for those of you who feel you need a post-bac program. We have a special downloadable report. We have a page with articles about post-bac programs. And I interviewed for our podcast several people, but this was probably the most amazing story, was the unbelievable story of an orthopedic surgeon, and how he overcame incredible obstacles, really, to attend a post-bac program, get into medical school, and now he's in a residency program for orthopedic surgery. He may even be done at this point. If you can also retake the MCAT, especially if you have a low MCAT score, that's a very good route to go. At this point in time, most schools are either taking your highest MCAT score or weighing most heavily your highest or most recent MCAT score. So that can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, but especially it depends on the school. But if your score is low, you really have only one way to go, and that is up. A high test score can mitigate a lower than average GPA. For U.S. allopathic schools, the accepted average MCAT score is a 510. So again, it's the schools you're applying to that really count, but that 510 number is a good number to keep in mind. Less than a 510 doesn't guarantee rejection, and above a 510 doesn't guarantee acceptance, but it does serve as a good rule of thumb. So your ability to do the work, what we've been talking about, is generally evident in your transcript and test scores, the objective elements of the application. Joe, if you recall, had a 495 MCAT and a low GPA. I think it was 3.2 overall with a 2.9 in the sciences, and he just could not make that argument. But he could go to a post-bac program. He could retake the GMAT and again raise and improve that part of his application and profile. The second part of the framework, show that you know what clinical practice is and have a realistic idea of what you're getting into, and perhaps have some direction in medicine. Now, let me ask you, how do you intend in your applications to show that you have a realistic idea of medicine, of clinical practice? Shadowing, we'll get to that in a minute. By clinical experience, clinical exposure is volunteer work, shadowing. Okay, anybody else? Volunteer at a hospital and clinical shadowing. Okay, work experience. If you have clinical work experience, that's fantastic. Fantastic. Clinical experience, good. Working in a medical-based field. Okay. Reading, I don't think that'll do it. Experiencing both the administrative and clinical side of medicine. Okay. Family members' disease and treatment, that can help. Research is not clinical exposure unless it's clinically based research. My own journey as a misdiagnosed patient, that can do it, but you have to be careful not to be bitter about your experience in your essay and application. Clinical experience, that's the best way. Okay, if you actually have clinical experience. All right, let me tell you what I think about that. Not all best things ever happen, right? That's true. Okay, medical schools want to admit people who are committed to medicine. Now, getting back to my friend Joe, who I mentioned at the beginning, he struggled to do what I'm suggesting on the call. He did have some clinical exposure. Again, he volunteered for a summer in the ER, and he did shadow for a week. But shadowing is the most passive form of clinical exposure, and it usually is for a limited time, and the only person who benefits from that is you. The doctor is giving you attention that perhaps he should be giving to patients. Patients aren't benefiting from your standing there and watching. You are getting exposure, but again, it's a good way to start exploring the field It's not a great way to end your exploration of clinical practice. What would be some other ways to go? Volunteering in an ER is something that I mentioned, volunteering in a clinic, becoming an EMT, becoming a medical scribe. Again, schools want to know that your commitment is real and not based on the latest TV hospital show. It must be based on experience in clinical settings. They want to know that you're not going to be squeamish, such that you can't function at the sight of blood, that you're realistic about the hours that doctors put in, that you understand that not all patients are nice and not all outcomes are good. And you have to be prepared, or you don't have to talk about it so much, but they have to believe that you can handle the workload, the emotional strain, and just the hours, the demands. And you can demonstrate that best by having been in that environment. A CNA also would qualify, yeah. Do you have direction both in terms of your educational needs and your post-medical school plans? Now, many secondaries will ask why you want to attend their school. In order to answer that question thoughtfully, you really have to have thought about the kind of medical education you want to have, and perhaps at least have some inclination of the direction you may want to take in medicine. They don't expect you to know your specialty with any tremendous conviction. You're going to have all kinds of experiences and exposure that you should keep an open mind about. But perhaps you know if you're more interested in primary medicine or pursuing a specialty. And do your areas of interest match the school's focus and strengths? So, for example, are you more interested in urban medicine or rural medicine? And how does that relate to the school that you're applying to? Where have you had experience? Primary care versus specialties. I already mentioned that. Research versus a clinical focus. Now, medical school by its nature is clinical. That's medicine. Some schools, though, do have more of a research focus, and then you presumably would have to show some interest in research. Or are you attracted to a specific specialty? That is also, again, I wouldn't say this is definitely what I'm going to do, because that would show a certain lack of flexibility and almost a closed mind on your part. But you can say, I'm leaning towards this profession. I'm leaning towards endocrinology because I'm a diabetic. I'm open to other specialties, but that's what I'm thinking about at the moment. Or I really want to do family, primary care. I don't know, it will be family medicine or internal medicine or pediatrics, but I'm leaning towards primary care. So the realism that I'm talking about will come out in your essays, your secondaries, even your letter of recommendation, and of course, your interviews. That's the second part of the framework. The first one is show you can do the work. The second one is a realistic perspective on clinical medicine. The third element is to show that you share the school's values and its mission. In other words, you have to show fit with each individual program that you're applying to. Now, how and when do you intend to show that fit? And again, that's for the question window. Your answer, please. Put in the question window. How do you intend to show fit with individual programs? In the secondary application, bullseye, Katrina. You got it. Karina, sorry. Extracurricular experiences, they can be part of it, yeah. Visiting the schools is definitely an element. I'm not sure what you mean by care is a cure in this context. Know their mission statement. That will definitely help you. Absolutely. Good, Catherine. Anybody else? Meeting the med students, that can give you insight. Okay, let's move on. Secondary applications, the focus is on fit. So, Karina, you were 100% right on there. Why do you want to attend this program? Why should they want you in their program? So what you're going to do is look at the school's mission and values. Somebody mentioned that. And so in your secondary essays, if asked, and in the interviews, you should be able to talk about your experiences and draw from them the qualities that your target programs value. And that you'll find, again, in the mission statement or the value statement that most medical schools have. If service to the urban underserved is a priority for the school, you could talk about your experience at an urban soup kitchen volunteering and how effective you were as a member of the food service team. If your target program values rural medicine, talk about your upbringing in rural, I don't know, Idaho or Georgia or Kansas, wherever it is, Arkansas, and your desire to settle there, if that's true. And here again, I'm going to come up with one of my warnings. There's an enormous difference between mouthing platitudes, spitting back the school's mission statement, and actually showing them that you share the values. The former is just sleight of hand and still isn't convincing. It isn't real. But examples in your essays, the bullet points in your resume or activity history, the examples given by your recommenders and letters of recommendation, and your responses to interview questions must in total demonstrate that you belong. It must in total demonstrate the qualities that the schools value. Now, you don't have to show in every answer all the values or entire mission statement, but as a whole, there should be elements that in total show you belong. One quality that is increasingly valued by medical school is teamwork. Dr. Karen Johnson, the admissions director at Baylor, assistant dean actually, she said on an Admission Straight Talk podcast, medicine is a team sport. So you must be showing teamwork through your application. And again, I'll tell you what, why don't you give me some examples in the question windows of teamwork that you've been involved in? Sure, Dalton Collegiate Sports works. Rowing team, good. Research, absolutely. Student Senate, excellent. Student government, yes. Committees, absolutely. Startup, okay. Managed a clinical team, excellent. School research competition, startup, as long as it was a team effort, sure. Yes, these are all examples of teamwork that you could have been involved in. Caring for children with disabilities, as long as it was, again, you were part of a team, you were working with others, church communities and leading volunteer group in hospital, definitely, Barbara. Yes, those are all examples of teamwork. As long as you were working with peers, not necessarily in a hierarchical setting where, let's say, you were the boss and they were the subordinates, you are talking about teamwork. You could also have been a captain of a team and been showing teamwork, but that's already, that's also showing leadership and teamwork, which is great. But again, teamwork is increasingly valued. If you have professional direction or think you know which area of medicine you want to go into, check out residency placement data to select the schools that are strong in your area of interest. Now, again, you should be open to other fields, but if you are leaning towards a particular field, I interviewed somebody for the podcast who all along was most interested in ophthalmology. She did go into ophthalmology, and she's now pursuing a fellowship in ophthalmology, or about to start one. She did not lock herself off to other options, but she knew what she was inclined towards, and that was one factor in choosing the medical school that she went to. It wasn't the only one. And it's also one more way you can show fit. If a school is really strong in orthopedics and you're interested in orthopedics and they place a lot of their graduates in orthopedic residencies, that's one element to fit. It may not be necessarily the stated one, but it certainly can be one. Again, a warning, focus on stats, rankings, and forum rumors can obscure this fit aspect of admissions. Now, I just mentioned looking at residency placement stats. That's, I think, a constructive use of stats. A less constructive use of stats would be discussing various rankings, discussing different, all the stats supplied in the MSAR, which I think is a marvelous resource, and their implication. The stats are what they are. Your stats are what you are. When you get into the application process, assuming you've chosen your schools appropriately, just make sure you're showing fit. The other thing that these stats will show you is that the acceptance rates at most schools is extremely low. And one of the implications of these low acceptance rates is that the schools have lots of opportunity to say no. And that they can be really, really choosy. Now, getting back to good old Joe, he really didn't have any direction within medicine. He didn't know any of the school's stated or unstated values. And you need to know those in order to choose the most appropriate schools for you and to convince them to accept you. So that's part 3 of the framework. Show that you share the school's values and its mission, and that's part of showing fit. The 4th part of the framework, demonstrate that you will contribute to class discussions and teamwork, the school's community, and ultimately make the school proud. What does this slide or this part of the framework imply to you? How will you help make us better? How well can you execute the mission and values? That was the last of the 4. This is a little bit different. How are you going to add to the school? Great. Chiney, you got it. Showing that you're passionate, possibly, but how are you going to add to the school? Chiney, you got that. Yay! That's right. How are you going to add? What are you going to do? Are you a contributor? Are you going to contribute? Well, the best way to show that you will be a contributor is to show that you have been a contributor in the past. You need to reveal a habit of contribution through your essays, your recommendation, your resume, your activity history, your interviews, and your letters of recommendation. So this is one of the reasons, if not the biggest reason, that non-clinical community service is so important. Medicine at its heart is a profession of service. And if you have to show that you're motivated by this desire to serve. Now, again, I'm talking here about non-clinical community service, and part of the reason they value this is it shows a certain well-roundedness as well as a commitment to service. But when you think about community service, I want you to realize that it's really a very, very broad term. It can really be service to any group that you identify with, are a part of, and wish to serve. It could be a church group, it could be an ethnic group, it could be a sports group, it could be a school group, a professional group. There are so many different ways to define your community. Of course, it could be your neighborhood, your geographic community, but it's a broad term. So don't think of it narrowly. It's really any group that you are part of and that you desire to serve. Now, the desire to serve isn't enough, though. There has to be the reality of service, and that implies an assumption of responsibility for an outcome. That's the distinguishing factor. And that was what makes you a contributor. When you assume responsibility for something and create a desirable outcome, or even just assume responsibility, hopefully you'll work hard and you'll have a desirable outcome. That is what makes your contributions valuable. Now, non-traditional applicants may have extensive work experience to draw on that they can use to show the quality school values. And much work today is done in teams. At the same time, there are opportunities for leadership. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples. Let's say you were a computer developer or programmer, where you are also a problem solver, and could the skills that you develop, the kind of logical approach to problem solving, could that be applied to diagnosis and the development of treatment plans? Or maybe you are a teacher and you develop really strong communication skills, especially when it comes to explaining complex topics to people who don't have a background in them. You do that with children all the time. Or maybe you're a consultant, a team lead on a consulting in a consulting capacity, or an engagement manager. Well, there you have leadership, teamwork, and organizational skills, all highly valued by medical schools. And again, your contributions in a professional capacity could help you show that you will be a contributor at work. Realize that most medical schools have too many qualified applicants. That was the slide I showed you a minute ago. And most of the people rejected can do the work required of medical school. So if not formally, then informally, medical school admissions is really a two-step process. The first one, evaluation, determining the qualified. Those are the people who can do the work. Those are the people who will fit in at the school. Those are the people who have a realistic idea of medicine. Those are the qualified. But then you come to the next step. Who's going to make a difference in the class and beyond? And those are the people who can show that they are going to contribute. Because the second part of admissions is selecting a class, crafting a diverse class of committed, talented future physicians. And this injects a real subjective element to the admissions and selection process. But the implication from the selection part of the process is that the schools have no reason to admit someone without something distinctive to contribute, either in their background, their performance, their perspective. There's no reason to admit someone lacking a history of initiative, a record of past impact and contribution. So we've gone through 4 parts of the framework. Let's go to the 5th one. And I kind of hinted at that a minute ago, but I'm going to say it now very explicitly. You want to reveal the personality traits that med schools value. What are some of those traits? In the question window, please. What are some of the personality traits, the characteristics, the attributes that medical schools value? Humility, I'm so glad that came first. Servitude, okay, it's a service mentality, sure. Patience, good, William, excellent. Anything else? Empathy, integrity, good, all good. Compassion, that was the one I was expecting to come first. Yes, Morgan. Quality care, that's not really a personality trait. That's certainly what they want you to give, but yes. Okay. You've all listed some great qualities: compassion, humility, attention to detail, professionalism, teamwork, communication skills, both the ability to speak clearly and to listen well. All parts of the application, the primary, the secondary, the interviews, and casual interactions with students and staff when you visit the school must convey these qualities. And Brittany said respect. That's another one. Absolutely. These traits should come through in the stories you tell in your personal statement, the most meaningful experiences, the activities descriptions, the secondary, the interviewed, whether it's the traditional or the MMI. Now, some of you mentioned leadership. Actually, I don't think that was mentioned. That is something that medical schools value. But as I said earlier, teamwork is gaining and really becoming the flip side of the golden leadership coin. Compassion and caring is absolutely required. Humility doesn't mean that you demean yourself, but it is definitely the opposite of arrogance and absolutely required for effective teamwork. You know, I think you need to realize that the schools, when they are evaluating you, and especially when they meet you in interviews, they're thinking, would I want this person taking care of my relative, of my mother, my father, my child, my sibling? And they're going to want somebody who's kind, compassionate, empathetic, humble, all those, and respectful. All those things are what's going through their mind. Now, attention to detail and professionalism is something that is also reflected in the care you take on the essays and your applications. And I interviewed for Admissions Straight Talk the Assistant Dean of Admissions at SUNY Upstate, and she absolutely railed against the typos and the lack of punctuation that they sometimes see at her school on their very, very simple secondary application. Folks, you are applying to professional school. This is not social media. Make sure you capitalize what should be capitalized, punctuate appropriately, check your spelling. This is, again, it's not Twitter, it's not Snapchat, it's not going to disappear. It's professional. Speaking of social media, clean it up. Per a recent Kaplan survey, 29% of medical school admission staff did check applicants' social media accounts, the public ones, and a majority found something that negatively affected an applicant's admissions chances. So you don't have to stop using social media. It's not necessary. But if you have something that you wouldn't want a professional colleague to see or know, then get it out of there. Now, in selecting the examples in your essays and interviews, choose those examples, experiences, and anecdotes that answer the question and reveal these traits, most of which are also reflected in medical school values in one way or another. And don't make the reader think too hard. As Sydney Foote articulately laid out in her Nail Your Medical School interview webinar, I think it was last month actually, explicitly weave into your anecdotes the traits you want the schools to recognize. Don't rely on them to figure it out or to come to the conclusion you want them to reach. Tell them. One more way to show professionalism, commitment, discipline, and organization: apply early and respond to all secondary applications promptly. Almost every medical school admissions person I have ever spoken with, and we have a whole bunch of interviews on Admission Straight Talk, you can look at that after the webinar, says apply early. Dr. Ryan Gray on a podcast, on one of our podcasts, said medical school admissions is like musical chairs. And as the game goes on, as the application cycle wears on, there are fewer and fewer chairs, and it's harder and harder to grab one. So with secondaries, return them ideally within 2 weeks of receipt. I would also encourage you to use the time between when you submit your primary and when you start getting secondaries, and they tend to come in a deluge, to pre-write some secondary applications. You can get some of the questions on SDN. It's one of the more constructive uses of SDN. And you can start pre-writing, or you can write. And also, when you're doing research on the schools in terms of which schools you want to apply to check off on your MCAS application, take notes. And cite the web page where you got the information so that you can go back to it if you want, or you'll have the notes available, and that will reduce the time it takes you to respond with any kind of depth to your secondary applications. All right, let's go back to your goal in submitting an application. Show that you belong in medical school. The first 3 people to answer the next question get a copy of the Definitive Guide to Pre-Medical Post-Baccalaureate Programs. You can get Kindle outside the U.S., paperback or Kindle in the U.S. And the question is, are you ready? What is the first thing that will make medical schools want to accept you? What is the first part of my framework? In the question window. Catherine, you got it. William, Barbara got it, and William got it. Okay, Rachel, do you have that? Let's go through all the 5 steps right now. First one is academic track record showing you can do the work. Then you want to have clinical experience and direction within medicine. Again, a realistic perspective on what you're getting into. You want to show that you share the school's values and its mission. And you want to demonstrate that you will be able to contribute distinctively to the school's class and community. And 5, you want to reveal the traits that medical schools value. And these were the steps that I was recommending to Joe when I spoke to him. These are the things that we here at Accepted advise our clients to do when we work with them. Some of them will have the track record, they'll have the clinical experience, but almost everybody needs help in showing that they share the school's values and mission, and that they're going to be contributors, and that they have those valued traits. That's what we help them with. Now, a little bit of bonus advice to keep in mind. The admissions committee readers are sharp, intelligent professionals. Don't try to craft, fake, or fool. The best presentation of you is an authentic reflection of your achievements and dreams, keeping in mind the 5 elements of a successful medical school application. Now, I started the webinar with the story of Joe, who was just at the beginning of his medical school journey and probably aiming for a 2019-2020 application. He had a lot of work to do, but he was very appreciative of the candid suggestions and recognized the value in my guidance. And I've spoken with hundreds, if not thousands, of medical school applicants like Joe and like you, striving to get into medical school and frankly stressed at the work involved and the possibility that they may not make the cut. We here at Accepted know how difficult and stressful this process can be, and we're here to help you. Your goal is to apply confidently and successfully to the right programs for you. To do so, you need the know-how supplied by experts applying general information to you as an individual. I've given you a framework. I've given you the most I can give you in a group setting. But you are an individual, and applying this advice to your particular situation, that requires individual consulting. Given the complexity of the application process and the stakes, you need a guide who knows the process inside out and who can support you through this grueling journey. You need Accepted to be your guide, because with Accepted, you get access to professional expert advice, you get experience, and you get objectivity. You'll also end up saving time, and you'll be able to apply with confidence and apply successfully. 85% of our clients were accepted last year. Actually, I think it was higher last year. The year before, it was 85%. We have the admissions experts, the guides, who can mentor you through the process so that you achieve your goal of applying confidently and successfully. Former admissions directors, staff members, postbac program directors who have been on the other side of the evaluation process and who can be your guide through the application process. Now, I gave you a comprehensive approach to the application process. The primary package that we are going to give you a special on is also a comprehensive approach. Here's what you should do. 1, visit accepted.com/primary. Choose a service that's right for you. Get the guidance you need to apply the high-level advice I've given here today to your specific situation. Go from confusion to clarity, from doubts to confidence. Now, some of you may say, isn't accepted expensive? Well, frankly, so is rejection. Frankly, it's a lot more expensive than our fees. Our fees are clear, but the cost of rejection, it's not quite as obvious. So let's explore that for a moment. The cost of reapplication can easily be a couple $1,000s. The cost of application alone the application fees alone can be well over $1,000, depending upon how many schools you apply to and the secondary application fees. A year of earnings at a much lower level than after you earn your MD or DO degree, again, that can be tens of thousands of dollars. In other words, what you earn in a gap year will be much less than what you'll earn after you get out of medical school. And then there's a potential that you could have gotten into a better program, perhaps with greater lifetime earnings and opportunities. So you're at a crossroads now. You can take a do-it-yourself approach, or you can invest in your professional future. Every year, we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier and decided, after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected, to work with us the second time around. They would have been better off, and so would you, if they work with us initially. But enough from me. What do accepted clients say? I've been excited. I'm so excited and relieved to have been accepted to a California school. I really appreciate all of Cheryl's help. I felt much more confident in my personal statement after working with her. With the one below it, I've been loving my help so far. My consultant, Dr. Herman Gordon, has been very helpful and knowledgeable. I wanted to share, and then the third one on the slide, I wanted to share my exciting news. I will be attending the University of Washington School of Medicine. And I received an email from the Dean of Admissions saying that I'm awarded a hefty scholarship. I'm feeling blessed and excited right now. I want to thank you, this was Alicia McNeese-Marnkar, for your support throughout my application. This was such a challenging process, but your patience and editing allowed me to express my passion for medicine. In writing my personal statement, I was having difficulty wrapping all my experiences into one concise theme, and upon talking to Jessica for the first time, I was instantly relieved. With her help, I was able to finish my essay so much faster than I anticipated. Thank you once again, Jessica. Or this one for Sydney Foote. Wow, I'm so impressed. You are a genius. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I could not have done it without you. There are 17 more hours till the application is due, and I'm not stressed at all because I know I have you by my side. Now, we'd love to help you as we help these clients, the ones who wrote the comments you just saw and thousands of others over the last 20 years. So once again, this is what I recommend you do to follow up to today's webinar, and I'll give the special again in a minute. Go to accepted.com/primary, choose a service that's right for you, get the guidance you need, and apply confidently and effectively. And for webinar registrants only, we are offering $250 off any primary package with coupon code MEDSAVE250, and that ends February 20th in 1 week. So you can talk to a consultant first, get comfortable, get guidance perhaps on the kind of primary application package will suit you best, and then save $250. Now, I promised you a Q&A, and let's get back to that, okay? Let me organize myself here, and I'll take questions. Nia asks, what would you tell an older non-traditional applicant who decides to change their path and pursue medicine? Do they have to go through a couple of years of direct clinical experience before applying, or are there alternatives that could replace clinical experience? Well, some of that, if you're non-traditional, I assume you've been doing something to date. And you don't need years of clinical experience, but you do need to do something that shows you are not applying on a whim. So that could be becoming an EMT, volunteering as an EMT. It could be volunteering in an ER, volunteering in a clinic. It could be something more demanding, like becoming a scribe or a phlebotomist. So there are other things that you should do. But I think it is important, both for you and for your admissions chances. And again, you don't have to do this for years, but you do need to be able to tell the schools, I've tested out my interest in a real clinical setting. Did I answer your question? Should I get accepted now before I take the MCAT? That will probably depend a little bit on your confidence that you're going to get a competitive MCAT and whether you have questions you want us to address with you now. Like what, you're very welcome, Nia. Like, should I do additional volunteering or should I do additional volunteering? Should I get involved in community service? Should I visit the schools? What schools, this, or help in choosing schools even before you take the MCAT? So, or not the MCAT, before you apply, to submit the MCAS. Okay, so the advantage of waiting till after you take the MCAT is you have a competitive score. That would be the advantage of that. Barbara, you're most welcome. Thank you. She wrote, thank you, Linda. This seminar was fantastic and helpful. I'm very pleased. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Okay, Reb asks, when reapplying to medical school, do you need to rewrite all essays or can you reuse essays? Well, it didn't work last time. So I certainly would recommend that you rewrite or improve, I would say, most of them, if not all of them. Using the same essays would imply stagnation, show that you haven't done anything of value since last year. It shows a certain lack of growth and possibly could be interpreted as laziness. And the third part of it is you're assuming that your essays are fine and can't be improved. That's, I think, a rather dangerous assumption to make. So I would strongly encourage you to critically look at the essays you wrote last year and seek to improve them. Again, something didn't work. Obviously, you could say it was other elements of your application, but I suspect they could be improved. And even if, I would suggest you write other perfect essays this time around. Again, focusing more on recent achievements and accomplishments. Okay, what else do I have? If I'm applying in a couple of years, should I wait to purchase the accepted package? Yes. Yeah, the accepted package is for this application cycle. If you have questions you want addressed and you want to just get advice on how to maximize the next year and a half or 2 years, you can purchase advising time, and we'd be more than happy to talk to you and advise you. And the minimum purchase is $315, but you know what? That could really pay off big time in terms of making really, really good use of the next year and a half to 2 years. Okay, excellent question. Let's see, what else do we have here? How important is the quality of resilience, i.e. trial and error, overcoming defeat or failure to an admissions committee? Thank you so much, Linda, for this seminar. You've raised my spirit and confidence so much further than any other webinar I've attended over the past 4 years. I certainly appreciate your help tonight. Wow, thank you for the wonderful feedback. Resilience is absolutely valued. Overcoming defeat or failure is definitely a sign of resilience. And it is overcoming obstacles as a sign of resilience. It's a sign of character strength. So it is valued. And again, I would go back to that podcast I mentioned, the unbelievable story of the orthopedic surgeon. Rachel, could you possibly post that URL for William? I think that would it'll raise your spirits further and give you more inspiration. He overcame an awful lot. Now, resilience does not mean that you don't have to show you can do the work. That's just my one caveat here. All right, thank you. And the other thing, Rachel is reminding me, I'm going to ask her to post that too. For those of you who are reapplicants, we are having a webinar specifically for reapplicants in March. Can you post that URL also? Okay, That last comment was for Rachel. All right. Parth asks, where is that? In what ways would a medical school value a non-traditional, let's say someone coming from finance background and engineering background? You mean how would they value your work experience? Is that really the question? Okay, well, engineering, there's a lot of problem solving. You also probably have excellent mathematical skills. Math is not the primary quality that they're looking for, but it certainly is valued. I would say that probably the biggest value for engineers would be problem solving, and that is a big part of medical diagnosis. I'm going to draw on my podcast, and I'm going to ask Rachel to get this too. I'm asking her to get a lot. I don't know if she's going to get all this, but we had a interview with the head of Harvard MX, Harvard Medical's online program, non-degree program, and he started out as an engineer and decided to switch to medicine. So it was kind of an interesting podcast. And then we also had a podcast with the author of Med School Uncensored, who also started out, I believe, in computers. So it's not unusual. It may not be the most common path to medicine, but there's nothing that's saying you can't make that switch. In terms of a financial background, business understanding, an understanding of business and finance is not going to hurt doctors who are notoriously bad at business. So, or traditionally, I should say, I think that's changing. So, an understanding of the economics of medicine is a good thing. Okay, I hope that answered your question, Parth. How does taking a gap year look if you do non-science related things? Well, it depends what you do is non-science related. If you sit on a beach most of the year, I don't think that's going to look so great. If you do something, I don't know, there'd be all kinds of things. If you spend the year traveling and you have the science background and you have the clinical exposure, if you take some time to travel, I think that would be considered a broadening experience. If you do some volunteer work in an underserved community, either within the United States or somewhere else, again, I think that would be considered valuable experience. If you do something in politics, it might be, in a campaign, that probably would be valued experience. So it's not so much that it's science or non-science, assuming you have the science background. The non-science could actually help you convey that you're going to contribute something distinctive to medical school. Okay? So that the details there count, Reb. Let's see what else we have here. This is a very good question, Rebecca. The question is, should I wait to submit my primary application until I have my MCAT score? When are you going to have your MCAT score? And I see Barbara has a very similar question. And she says she's going to have her MCAT. She's taking the MCAT in May. Let's see, where does your answer? Just a few weeks after I was planning on submitting. Okay. All right. This is the way it works. Again, the earlier you can apply, the better. If you end up in MCAS, you can submit your MCAS earlier, but MCAS you can submit your MCAS application sooner, or the ACOMAS application sooner, but it will not be processed until they have your MCAT score. So I'm assuming, Rebecca, that you're planning to take the MCAT at, let's say, the end of June. You will not have your MCAT score till August. August is not yet. August is when you kind of start. I start thinking that you're a little late. Not horribly late, but a little bit on the late side. And it's basically a judgment call. It's a personal decision. People do definitely get accepted who take their MCATs on the schedule that you're outlining, but I think it's a little bit harder. So it becomes a personal decision in the sense that, do you want to have some chance of starting medical school in 2018, even if it is reduced? Or do you really just want to apply once? Do you want to maximize the likelihood that you're going to apply once and get accepted? If the latter, I would say wait. If the former, you want to have some chance of it getting accepted in 2018-19, even if it's not as good as if you had applied in June or early July, then apply in August. Okay, is that clear? And thank you for the question. It's a very important question. Morgan asks, how do you work on improving your interview? Practice, or is there something else that can be done? There's no doubt in my mind that practice, a mock interview, which we do offer, is the best way to prepare for an interview. We offer mock traditional interviews, mock MMIs, and we have people who have experience with both kinds. So that is the best way to handle that. And I would recommend, again, our staff has years of experience. Some of them were interviewing for medical schools. Some were doing interview prep for medical schools. That is, in my opinion, the best way. You wouldn't consider performing, in music or dance or theater without rehearsals. You wouldn't, consider. It wouldn't even think of it. And this is on some level, it's a really, really important. Your interview is a really important performance. And the mock interview also helps you calm your nerves. Now, second choice, I would strongly recommend the webinar that Sid Foote, our consultant, gave in January on medical school interviews. Rachel, if you finished chatting out all the resources I recommended, oh yeah, you did, then please also chat out the URL to the interview webinar. And Morgan, you might want to listen to that because she does give other advice that you can implement short of an actual practice and rehearsal. Thank you. Dana has an interesting question. How much does the time period of activities matter for applications? I have been involved in activities. and volunteering during college that are important, have shaped me as a person, but will have happened several years ago now that I'm applying. That's one of those questions that I think would be best answered in terms of the details. And it's kind of hard for me to give you a general answer to that one. Certainly recent activities, recent achievements tend to be weighed more heavily, but they're not, if you did it in college and let's say, you're working a gazillion hours a week, maybe you don't have the time to do that. Again, the details matter here. I don't think I can give you an answer in this forum. Okay. Dalton, I want to, again, thank you very much for your comment. He wrote, thank you so much for the advice. This has been proven to be an extremely invaluable hour. I was waitlisted last year, and I think you will help be the difference maker this time around. Thank you so much for your feedback. We hope we'll be the difference maker, and I'm glad you found the webinar valuable. Does accepted help in making a list of schools to apply to, picking schools where we have higher chances of getting in versus far-fetched schools? Yes, we definitely do that. Yes. Okay. Okay, Stephanie asks, it's important to have a part-time or full-time job related to medicine on top of volunteering if you have a gap year before matriculation. Again, that's kind of a question that part of my answer would depend on what non-clinical job would you take and what kind of clinical exposure do you have to date. And if you are volunteering in a clinical capacity, and let's say you're working to make some money and perhaps have less debt when you get into medical school, you might just be fine. So here the details are going to make a difference, and I'm not sure I can give a categorical answer. Okay, is it better to take a gap year? Do med schools value that more? Again, excellent question, Anu. Thank you. It's better to take a gap year if you just need the time to do well in college, to do well on the MCAT, or if you just need a break. Then it's great to take a gap year. Do med schools value that more than not taking the gap year? Well, it would tend to depend a little bit on what you do during the gap year. If you basically use it to fill out secondary applications because you applied late and don't feel like stressing after all the stress of college, that's not going to be looked on so positively. If you use the gap year to perhaps work in a clinical setting while maybe doing some research, if you use the gap year for personal growth, for travel, or at least part of it, again, that can be viewed very positively. So it really depends on what you do with that year in terms of whether it's going to be better or worse. And with that, I think I'm going to end this with a final story and a thought. But first, I want to thank you very much. You've been a marvelous audience. I appreciate your time, your answers, your questions, your participation, and I want to wish you good luck with your application. Now, that final story is about Sally. Sally was an accepted client. She accepted to work with her. She is an Asian American who had good stats and a strong but fairly typical profile. Her consultant coached her through the process, including advising her, mentoring her, and overcoming her shyness in interviews. Here's what Sally wrote after her acceptance. I don't think I would be at the same place today without your help. So out of 20 secondaries, I received 18 interviews. I went to 11, accepted to 5, waitlisted to 4. Well, obviously, Sally's results were great, and the most obvious benefit of working with Accepted, there was another one, less tangible, but no less important. Sally was more confident throughout the process. She was less anxious, even during her interviews. Now, she considers herself an introvert and admitted to being very nervous about the interviews before she worked with Accepted consultant Sydney Foote. That's the final story. The final thought, all 5 parts of this framework that I outlined for you today are necessary for a successful application. It's not 1 or 2 or even 3 or 4 that will do it. You need all 5. Sally had the 5. Our clients have the 5. And you can too.